What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, it is my first time finishing Resident Evil Village, the first video in this series of the year. I did 9 videos last year where I went back and played older games and came up with videos talking about my thoughts on each of those, and now we finally return to that in 2026 with Resident Evil Village. Wanted to get to this one ahead of Resident Evil Requiem, which has recently released. This was the last Resident Evil I wanted to cross off the list. There's others that I still have to play, but we'll kind of talk about that in a second. But I crossed this one off the list ahead of the new one, and I have a lot of thoughts about Resident Evil Village. So without further ado, let's dive in. Before we start talking about Village, I want to give you my background on my history with the franchise so that you know where I'm coming from with my thoughts. So before making the channel, the first Resident Evil game I checked out was the Resident Evil 4 remake back in 2023 when it came out. That was my first experience with the franchise. Hadn't checked it out before that. Wasn't really interested in it until 4 remake came out, and a lot of people were talking very good about it. Decided to give it a shot. I loved Resident Evil 4 remake. It is still probably my favorite game in the franchise that I've played. Then I went back and played Resident Evil 2 Remake, which is a great game. That game gets so much love, and it's very understandable why it is a great game, and you can kind of see where Resident Evil got its start from that, even though there was one before that, or the original. I still haven't played that one, but 2 Remake, fantastic game. Resident Evil 3 Remake I also played in 2024, so I played 2 and 3 Remake in 2024, and then 4 I played the year before that. 3 Remake, not very high on that one. That one's definitely my least favorite out of the ones I've played. Just a lot of issues. It still has that, fun level design, gameplay design that you see in the other games, but there's just some problems with it with story and just the moments in the game just not hitting like it does in the other games. It's a very short game, very short game. 3 Remake, not my favorite. But then I started this channel in late 2024, early 2025, and then if you've paid attention to the channel, I made my first time finishing video on Resident Evil 7. I finished that one up and made a video on that back in, I believe, June of last year. Really enjoyed that game. First person perspective, changing things up, kind of renewing the franchise. After, I've heard 5 and 6 were kind of hit or miss for a lot of people. I haven't played those games. But 7, bringing the franchise back to survival horror and doing a very good job of it. Truly a terrifying game. There's a lot of scary moments, a lot of fun moments in that game. The gameplay is great. Story is solid. And visuals, the villains, there's a lot of good things about Resident Evil 7. And a lot of people hold it as their favorite in the franchise, and I would not blame you if you thought that. I really enjoyed Resident Evil 7. So going into Village, based on what I had heard and seen, playing Resident Evil 7, it kind of seemed like it's first person, but they're kind of going for a more action-focused experience, kind of trying to mix Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 4. That was kind of my expectation going into playing Village. I'd heard a lot of good things about it, but I was excited to go into Village. I didn't know what to expect. I wasn't really looking forward to continuing to play as Ethan Winters and kind of doing that. We'll talk about that a little bit later with the story. But other than that, I was excited going into Village. And now with all that background out of the way, you know where my thoughts are coming from. I've played 2, 3, and 4 remakes, haven't played the originals, and I've played 7. So there's a lot of Resident Evil I haven't gotten around to, but I've played the main ones that I want to play before getting into Village, and then also getting into Requiem, which has recently released. So now the first thing we'll talk about, like always, is gameplay with Resident Evil Village. Capcom have really honed in on how good their gameplay is. All the gameplay in these Resident Evil games has always felt great. And even changing the perspective from third to first person, that switch, they were able to nail that. Resident Evil 7's gameplay felt really good. The gunplay just feels super smooth, and it's the same in Resident Evil 8. But like I said, they took a more action-focused approach to this game compared to Resident Evil 7, which was more survival horror focused, where you were kind of struggling for ammo for throughout the game, and that's how it was supposed to be. You were supposed to scavenge resources, try to hold on to resources as much as you can. Every missed shot in Resident Evil 7 hurt. It hurt really, really bad, because that's a shot you're not going to get back. That gameplay felt super, super good. But now, more action focused, so guns have more ammo. There's a lot more enemies on the screen at the same time. That first section in the village where you were getting swarmed by enemies, very reminiscent to the first section in Resident Evil 4, where it's just constant until finally it gets cut off. That part of the game, a lot of fun. That set the tone for what the game was going to be. It's not like over the top action focused like an action movie, but it's definitely more heavy on the action compared to Resident Evil 7. But they were able to take that more action focused approach and nail it. Gameplay feels really, really good. Lots of good weapon variety, from weapons that you can buy, weapons that you can just find from exploring. I think what this game does really, really well is it does mix 7's perspective and 4's kind of more open-ended gameplay, where you are exploring, finding currency. The merchant in this game is actually the Duke. There wasn't a merchant in Resident Evil 7, but you had the Stranger, I think was his name, in Resident Evil 4. I could be remembering wrong, and maybe had an actual name. But in this game, you have the Duke, who is your merchant. And throughout the game, you'll find currency that you can bring to him. And that is where you can really see how they are taking what Resident Evil 4 did so well and bringing it into this game. Where the shop is, you can buy a bunch of weapons. You can buy recipes to be able to craft, grenades and types of ammo. You're able to upgrade your weapons here. And as the game progresses, you're able to unlock new weapons. That feels really, really good. And exploring off the beaten path to find all these currencies and materials and treasures to sell. You'll find treasures just out while exploring, but also throughout the game and throughout the main story to sell. So it gives you a lot to go for and a lot to try and buy through your first playthrough, and also subsequent playthroughs when you keep going. Also, the village kind of being a hub in a sort of way, where it's not somewhere where it's just like there's no combat and you're going around talking to characters like you would in any other hub, but it's a part of the game and a part of the map that you come back to after, going off and doing that main story section over there. Everything leads back into the village, but what's really cool is that the first time you're in the village, everything's kind of locked off. And that's how Capcom does their game design. You see it, and it's almost like Metroidvania, where you're like, I can't get into that room yet, but I'm sure further down the line I will be able to, through some sort of tool, or something will happen in the world or the story to be able to get into there. You'll be able to go back into that room at some point throughout the world and the story. That's kind of how Capcom does their main level design, where you walk in there, oh, that door's locked, but I'll be able to come back around, and that's where I have to go. At some point, that door will be able to be unlocked, whether it's by me or it'll just be unlocked by something else. That's how the game design works. And in the village, it's basically that, but more opened up, where you'll go, do the first section of the game, come back, and then you can find all these other things that were previously locked, that can now be unlocked based on things you've acquired or things that have happened throughout the story. So the village being that hub, really, really cool, and a really cool way of progressing, feeling like you're unlocking things all the time after these main story segments. So progression throughout the main game, a lot of fun, getting the currency, being able to buy, upgrade weapons, buy recipes. It's all done very well. It's all taken from Resident Evil 4 and done just as good as that game. It all feels very, very good to do. The gameplay feels tight. It feels really, really good to shoot enemies. The enemy variety is solid. The The Lycans are really cool as an enemy. You know, they're able to wield weapons. They attack in multiple packs. There's multiple in a pack that can really try to overwhelm you if you're not careful. So it really makes you try to think, you know, do I have the ammo to spare to be able to take out these enemies and I can get more resources from those enemies? Or do I need to just run away, save my resources? Very well done. It feels great. Also, you're able to hunt animals as well throughout the game and bring what they drop back to the Duke to be able to cook up food to give you permanent health, or, you know, your knife is able to take more durability or more damage, that kind of thing. Also very cool. Inventory management is back, kind of sort of like Resident Evil 4, where it's a way bigger inventory. That's how 4 was, and you're able to rotate and move stuff around to be able to fit more items into there. So that's also a very cool mechanic that they brought back. So it is basically Resident Evil 7's gameplay and perspective, and they just mix Resident Evil 4 with it. And that is what you get with the gameplay in Resident Evil 8. It's very good. I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun with it. I was always having fun while playing this game, and that's what's most important. Throughout the game and the different sections of the game that you go and do, I was always having fun. So the gameplay in Resident Evil Village is a lot of fun, very enjoyable. If you liked 7, even if you've liked all the other Resident Evil remakes that they've done, you're gonna like Village's gameplay. It is very well done, and I enjoyed it a lot. Now I'm gonna clump a lot of different topics into one section of the video: visuals, atmosphere, and performance, because this game visually, very beautiful. Lots of very cool visuals that you'll encounter throughout your experience with the game. Just starting off in the village, snowy atmosphere, snowy feel to the game, which I feel like we just don't see a lot in games. Maybe it's just me, but maybe I just don't play a lot of games with snow in them. Resident Evil Village, in that part of the game, lots of snow, very kind of stranded feel, isolated feel in the village, because you're the only, you know, human there. You're the only survivor there, and all these enemies are coming to attack you. And the way that the village is designed, each house and building feels different to go into. Very cool visuals and feel to the village, but also just going to the different parts and the different villains kind of layers throughout the game. We'll talk more about the villains themselves in the story part of the video, but I mean, everyone's seen it, the first part of the game. The castle is just beautiful, just from like architecturally, but also just the way that it's laid out and the details. If you were to stop and smell the roses, very bad pun intended, I didn't even really mean to do that, but you will see that there's a lot of detail poured into all of the different parts of the game, but the castle definitely stands out as one that you'll get to explore for a couple hours, really kind of sink your teeth into. The castle's a big part of it. The second part of the game, I forgot the name of it off the top of my head, but that's a very cool section visually, but also from a gameplay perspective. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Each part of this game visually has a great distinct feel to it, and that's what it should do. If you're going to split us off into, you know, 4 or 5 different parts of the game that you're going to spend some time with, a couple hours with each part, you want to make them feel different. The factory feels great. The kind of fishing pier part of the game that you'll see also feels great. So each part of the game has a great visual feel to it, and also atmosphere. Very different from Resident Evil 7, because, you know, that one's more horror focused. This one has some scary moments, but definitely not as much as Resident Evil 7. 7's atmosphere was fantastic, so this one doesn't quite hit that, but it still does have great atmosphere and visuals, and also performance. Not something I talked about in the Resident Evil 7 video, or really just with all the Resident Evil games that I played. They really knock it out with performance. I have no issues at all with performance. I have played on PC, that's where I played this game at. So performance wise, they always knock it out of the park, it feels like, with these Resident Evil games. They're always very well optimized, and I never have any performance hiccups at all. Didn't have any experience with that with Resident Evil Village, so that's just something I wanted to shout out very quickly. Performance, very, very good in Village, and visuals and atmosphere. This game came out in 2021. It's got the visuals that say that it did. It definitely took the Capcom engine, and it just seems like with every game, they just upgrade it in the visuals department. So from 7 to 8, you can definitely see that leap. So with the visuals, atmosphere, and performance, this kind of all combines into a game that not only feels good to play with the gameplay, but also looks good while you're playing the game, and just gives you a great atmosphere to get immersed in throughout all parts of the game. And now we'll dive into story. This game, just to give a quick recap of how long it took me to finish it, I want to say it took me 8 or 9 hours to finish, maybe 7, so 7, 8, 9 hours, somewhere in that range. I don't exactly remember. The in-game clock, I'm sure, said something different, but I'm kind of just going off of Steam. So again, Resident Evil games always hit that sweet spot of your first playthrough is definitely going to be your longest playthrough, but then it sets it up for multiple playthroughs after that. Speed runs, that's what it really goes into. It gives you a lot of things to do after the fact, to go back in and have the urge and feel like you should play the game again. So 7, 8, 9 hours, that's kind of what the time was for me to finish Village. But getting into story, kind of giving a very quick plot premise, not getting into any spoilers at all. It's set 3 years after 7, and you see Ethan Winters and his wife Mia. They're going to move to Europe. They're living with Rosemary, their 6-month-old daughter, and then all of a sudden Chris Redfield comes in and murders his wife, steals his baby, and kidnaps Ethan. And then that sets off the plot of this game, where you'll see yourself get thrown into the village, and then your goal is to find Rose and get answers to what is going on and what happened. And story-wise, with 7, I thought that the story was good. Not great, I thought it was good. There were some enjoyable parts about it. Ethan Winters as a main character, wasn't a huge fan of in 7. It wasn't anything bad, but just not my favorite main character. And I think in Resident Evil 8, definitely hasn't improved for me. I'm just not an Ethan Winters fan. I think at some points he's even worse in this game. There's a lot of questionable dialogue choices where Resident Evil always tries to go for that kind of, cringy and, that kind of always, the stuff you always see in, horror movies. That kind of dialogue. I can't think of the right words to put to that dialogue, but just, kind of like what you'll see from Lee on Resident Evil 4, but that's done very, very well, where it's like cliche, but it's done in a way to where it doesn't bother you. It actually makes you laugh. But the way that they try to do it with Ethan Winters in this game, it doesn't really hit. I mean, there's some funny dialogue, but for the most part, when it comes to Ethan Winters, there's a lot of dialogue that just made me sit there and go, yeah, that was not great.
Well, move!
All clear.
Rose? What the hell are you doing with my daughter?
Package secure, sir.
Take him away.
I said get your hands off her!
Ethan, no.
Let me guess. You're thinking, take me out like the others, and then he gets to go and save Rose, right?
I'm healing my daughter.
Look, you got this all wrong. Tell me I'm talking. Shut your fucking hole! Sorry about that.
But as I was going throughout the game, at first I was thinking that this story was not great. I wasn't really enjoying where it was going. The characters, at least not the villains, but just the main characters, you know, I wasn't really feeling. But as the story went on, there were some things that happened, some moments in the story where I was like, okay, you know what, this isn't as bad as I thought. Is it as good as 7's story? I'd say no, but it's not a bad story like I thought it would be. I think this is just another, you know, at its best, good story, but it's just kind of an okay story. Nothing that is outright bad. There's some bad moments, but overall, after things, you know, got wrapped up, I thought it was a okay to good story. And now with 7 and 8 being out, but now Requiem being out, we kind of leave this story behind, these characters behind. It's one that, like, from a gameplay perspective, I think it's definitely worth playing these games. There's a lot of cool moments. Story-wise, I feel like the only thing that 7 and 8 do very, very well are the villains, which we'll talk about now. You'll see the main villain, Mother Miranda, and her 4 lords, who are Dimitrescu, Benevito, Salvatore Moreau, and Heisenberg, which all have very cool, unique looks to them. Art direction-wise, they all look great, but also just they do a fantastic job of having unique feels and kind of stories behind them, and that's where this game takes you to each of the 4 lords' kind of realms and layers to go through and eventually fight them in boss fights. I thought each of these different sections of the game were done very, very well. My favorite, just based on a first playthrough, probably going to be House Benevito, but I could see definitely where that part of the game on replays, on second playthroughs, third playthroughs, probably not the highlight. So that one, just from what it did from a gameplay perspective, I really enjoyed. But also the castle with Dimitrescu, that's probably going to be the part of the game where a lot of people like it the most. I enjoyed the factory with Heisenberg. I really did enjoy that. The one that was probably my least favorite, but still a good part of the game, was with Salvatore and that kind of part of the game. But each of the 4 parts with these 4 villains, I think, are great. The villains themselves, really, really well done. And it was the same in Resident Evil 7. 7 had great villains with the Baker family. And this game definitely takes a different approach to that, but has a very, very well done cast of villains I really enjoyed. So overall, story, I think, is okay to good at its best, but definitely not as good as 7's. Villains, very well done, definitely the best part of the story by far. But all I can say is that I'm very glad that we are away from Ethan Winters. Just not the biggest fan of the main character. Glad that we're kind of steering away from that. It was, you know, cool to have him, I guess, in the last 2 games. Do something different with the story, new characters. But now we're away from that. We got a new character in Requiem. We also have Leon coming back. So very excited for that. But overall, the village story, okay to good, great villains, and overall, not something that I feel like you have to experience if you're going into Resident Evil. I feel like you could definitely skip them. I'm just, you know, I'm not the biggest fan of the story, so I think they're definitely skippable stories, but if you're just talking about the game overall, I definitely think the gameplay is worth going through, even though the story has some bumps in the road. It's definitely hit or miss with the story, but okay to good. That's what I'll do to wrap up this segment. I know I've been kind of going on for a minute. The story is okay to good with great villains. And the last thing we'll touch on before we wrap this video up is the DLC and side modes, because like with all the Resident Evil games, at least with 7, they had a lot of DLC for Resident Evil 7. Only one of those DLCs I played through. The other ones were paid, so I did not. This game has DLC, extra features, extra modes. First, we'll talk about the Mercenaries mode, which is added on for free. I think you just have to beat the game and then you unlock it. This is the first time I've played this mode. I know it's been in, I think, Resident Evil 4, or the original I feel like maybe didn't have Mercenaries. Correct me if I'm wrong. but I know 5 had it. I'm pretty sure it was maybe 5 that first brought it in, but then the 4 remake brought in Mercenaries. I do know that for sure, but this is the first time I've actually played through this mode in this game. I didn't play a lot of it, I will admit that. I played maybe a couple of matches of Mercenaries in Resident Evil 8, but it is a lot of fun. Because the gameplay is so good, I could definitely see this mode being that addicting thing where after you finish the story, you're doing, you know, maybe a second playthrough and you're like, I kind of want to break from this, but I still want to engage with the really fun gameplay. You have Mercenaries to mess with, and there's different levels, and just going throughout each run feels very, very good. The progression feels great. So not a whole lot to say about Mercenaries, but it's a added on free side mode. There's nothing wrong with that, and it's also a great side mode at that. So it's a free piece of content that is different enough from the main game to want to play it a lot, but also keeps that fun gameplay and progression going for you to engage with. There is the Shadows of Rose DLC, which I did not play. I've heard some kind of solid things about it, you know, continuing on after the main story with that. Not really something I'm super interested in playing. If I ever want that Resident Evil itch and maybe I catch it on a sale, you know, maybe I'll talk about it. Maybe I'll end up doing a Resident Evil DLC wrap up. I'll go back and play the 7 DLCs, play the 8 DLC Shadows of Rose. We'll see how that goes. Not something I'm definitely, you know, I have to play this for sure. Maybe at some point if I want that Resident Evil itch, catch it on a sale, I'll go back and play it. There's extra things like, you know, there's a photo mode they added after launch, a third person mode which I didn't get to mess with. I felt like, you know, messing with that with my first playthrough is not something I felt like should have been done, because it was a first person designed game, and the fact that you can play it in third person, you know, go for it. If this is a game that you want to play in third person, you have the ability to do that now. I think it's something that is in the game by default now, but I could be wrong. It might be something that they just added with the DLC to be able to do that. I don't know. I don't know how it works. I do know that the entirety of the DLC and the third person mode, it seems like it's bundled in one big DLC, which I feel like is kind of weird. You can't just buy the DLC by itself. I'm not entirely sure how it works, but anyways, a lot of extra content, a full-on DLC, a side mode with Mercenaries mode that was tacked on for free. Very good side mode there. So, like what they've done with Resident Evil 7, post-launch support, they always add a bunch of stuff in to give you more Resident Evil to mess with. So overall, Mercenaries is a fun side mode. Shadows of Rose is there, not something I've played, but maybe something I'll get back to in the future. And that is going to do it for the video. Thank you guys for watching, hanging out, talking about Resident Evil Village. Let me know down in the comments, have you played Resident Evil Village? What are your thoughts on the game? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Where would you rank it in the realm of Resident Evil games? Would it be high? Would it be low on your list? Let me know down in the comments. If I had to pick or rank these games, the ones that I played right now, from 2, 3, 4 remakes, and then 7 and 8, Village would probably be at number 4. I'd probably put it above 3 remake. I'd probably put 8 Village at number 4. Then I'd probably go to 7 into 2 remake and then into 4 remake. Now, it being at 4 doesn't mean it's a bad game. This is definitely not a bad game. There's a lot of good here. I'd say this is even at a very, very low great. But story-wise, it kind of drags it down. But the gameplay and the progression there is a lot of fun. So that is probably, this definitely the best part of the game for sure. But I did have a lot of fun with Resident Evil Village. And overall, I'd say if you're going on the Resident Evil journey, even though the things I said about the story being something that I feel like you could definitely skip, it doesn't, you know, you don't have to experience it. I'd still say from a gameplay perspective and the moments that happen in this game, 100% you gotta play this game. If you're gonna go through and play them, I'd say you for sure should play 7 and 8. These are definitely must experience Resident Evil games from a survival horror perspective with 7, but also the more action focused perspective with 8. So that is going to do it for the video. Thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for more, and I'll talk to you later.